The room was already filled with elegance, whispers, and champagne bubbles floating through the air, but the moment he stepped inside, time itself seemed to stop. Conversations fell silent. Glasses paused midair. Hearts skipped beats. In that single breathless instant, no one could believe what they were seeing. Michael Jackson had just walked into a wedding in Cape Town. No announcement, no press release, no red carpet, just a legend quietly entering a room and instantly transforming it into history. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another untold story. This wasn't a concert. This wasn't a world tour. This wasn't a public appearance planned months in advance. This was a private wedding, held behind closed doors, inside the residence of the United States ambassador in South Africa. And yet, somehow, Michael Jackson, the most famous man on the planet, had chosen this moment, this place, this gathering, to make one of his most mysterious and emotional appearances. To understand why this moment mattered, we have to step back, far beyond the wedding aisle, beyond the flower arrangements, beyond the tuxedos and champagne flutes, and into the heart of Michael Jackson, a man whose relationship with the world had become both deeply complicated and profoundly misunderstood. By 1997, Michael Jackson was no longer just a pop star. He was a global symbol, a myth, a mystery, a lightning rod for love, controversy, admiration, and pain. Every move he made was dissected, debated, and dramatized. The tabloids followed him relentlessly. Rumors shadowed him wherever he went. The world saw him, but very few truly knew him. And yet, in the midst of all that noise, Michael Jackson still sought something simple: connection, humanity, belonging, and perhaps most of all, peace. That search would lead him to Africa. Africa was not just a destination for Michael Jackson. It was a spiritual home, a source of ancestral pride, a place where he felt his soul breathe easier. He spoke often about Africa as the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of humanity, and the origin of his own heritage. To him, Africa wasn't distant, it was deeply personal. So when he traveled to South Africa in the late 1990s, it wasn't just a visit, it was a pilgrimage. But no one could have predicted that during this journey, Michael Jackson would quietly step into one of the most exclusive weddings in the country and leave behind a story that would echo for decades. The bride was Prudence Solomon, a beloved television personality in South Africa, known for her grace, intelligence, and warmth. The groom was Jerry Nzerillo, a powerful hotel magnate and longtime friend of Michael Jackson, someone who had shared years of friendship, trust, and private moments with the king of pop away from the spotlight. Their wedding was meant to be elegant, intimate, and secure. It was held at the residence of the U.S. ambassador, a location chosen not only for its beauty but also for its privacy and security. No paparazzi, no flashing cameras, no media frenzy. Or so they thought. What no one expected was that Michael Jackson would accept the invitation, not as a distant celebrity sending flowers or congratulations, but as a guest of honor. And when he arrived, the world, at least inside that room, stopped. He didn't arrive with an entourage of bodyguards or a wave of reporters. He arrived quietly, wearing a dark jacket, sunglasses, and his signature aura, that unmistakable presence that made people feel both awe and comfort at the same time. Witnesses later described the moment as surreal. It felt like time froze, one guest recalled. We were at a wedding and suddenly we were in history. The bride herself would later say that his presence felt like a blessing, unexpected, overwhelming, and deeply emotional. For her, Michael Jackson wasn't just a celebrity. He was a friend, a supporter, a soul who understood the power of love, unity, and celebration. But what made this moment truly extraordinary wasn't just that Michael Jackson attended the wedding. It was how he attended. He didn't dominate the room. He didn't demand attention. He didn't make the event about himself. Instead, he blended into the celebration with humility, warmth, and quiet joy. He smiled, he hugged, he spoke softly, he laughed, he listened. He watched the couple exchange vows with visible emotion. And in doing so, Michael Jackson reminded everyone there of something they had almost forgotten, that beneath the fame, beneath the headlines, beneath the myth, he was human. But behind this peaceful moment was a deeper story, one filled with struggle, resilience, and longing. In the years leading up to this wedding, Michael Jackson had endured some of the darkest chapters of his life. His reputation had been shaken. His trust in the world had been deeply wounded. He had been judged, misrepresented, and in many ways isolated. The world saw his fame, but very few saw his loneliness. The world heard his music, but very few heard his pain. And yet, despite it all, Michael Jackson continued to give. He continued to love. He continued to believe in humanity, even when humanity seemed to fail him. Africa, in many ways, became a refuge. Not just geographically, but emotionally. In Africa, he was not just Michael Jackson. He was a brother, a son, a visitor returning home. And on that day, October 8, 1997, inside the residence of a U.S. ambassador in Cape Town, Michael Jackson was not a superstar. He was simply a guest, but a guest who changed everything. As the ceremony unfolded, the bride walked down the aisle, the groom waited with quiet anticipation, and the guests held their breath, not because of who was watching, but because of what they were witnessing. Love, unity, and the quiet presence of a man whose life had been anything but quiet. When the vows were exchanged, witnesses noticed something remarkable. Michael Jackson wiped away tears. Not dramatic tears. Not public tears. Quiet, private tears, the kind that fall when a heart recognizes something pure. Those who knew him well understood why. Love, especially pure, unconditional love, had always moved Michael Jackson deeply. It was the core of his music, the foundation of his humanitarian work, the heartbeat of his soul. From Heal the World to Man in the Mirror, from We Are the World to Earth Song, everything he created was a plea, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a cry for humanity to be kinder, gentler, and more compassionate. And here in this quiet wedding, he saw love in its simplest form. Two people choosing each other. Two lives becoming one. Two souls standing before the world, even if that world was small, and saying, "We choose love." And in that moment, Michael Jackson wasn't the man who broke records. He wasn't the man who sold out stadiums. He was the man chased by cameras. He was a witness to love. But the story doesn't end there. Because after the ceremony, something even more unexpected happened. The reception began, laughter filled the room, glasses clinked, music played. And then, in a moment no one had planned, no one had scripted, no one had dared to imagine, Michael Jackson stood up. The room went silent. No one knew what was about to happen. Would he speak? Would he leave? Would he simply smile and sit back down? Instead, he did something that would become legend. He began to dance. Not a full performance. Not a stage show. Not moonwalks or spins under spotlight. But something softer. Something quieter. Something intimate. He swayed gently to the music. He moved with grace. He smiled. He invited others to join him. And just like that, a wedding became something more than a wedding. It became a moment of magic. Guests later described it as surreal, dancing alongside the king of pop in a private room, in a foreign country, in a moment that felt both unreal and deeply real at the same time. One guest reportedly said, "It was like watching a legend become human, and in doing so, become even more legendary." But beyond the beauty of the moment, there was something else, something invisible but powerful. Hope. For Michael Jackson, this moment wasn't just about celebrating a wedding. It was about reconnecting with the world. It was about finding warmth in a world that had grown cold. It was about feeling safe in a space where he didn't have to defend himself, explain himself, or perform for approval. He could simply be. And for those few hours inside those walls, Michael Jackson wasn't alone. But as the night continued, as laughter echoed and candles flickered, the outside world remained unaware of what had just happened. There were no breaking news alerts, no headlines, no viral photos, no trending hashtags, just a handful of people carrying a story they would never forget, a story they would tell their children, their friends, their grandchildren. I was there when Michael Jackson stopped the world. Because that's exactly what it felt like. The world, with all its chaos, noise, judgment, and cruelty, had stopped. And in its place was something gentler, something kinder, something human. But why did Michael Jackson choose this wedding? Why this couple? Why this moment? To understand that, we must understand his relationship with Jerry Inzerillo. Jerry wasn't just a business associate. He wasn't just a hotel magnate. He was a friend, someone who had known Michael Jackson beyond the stage, beyond the cameras, beyond the costumes. Their friendship was built on trust, a rare and precious thing in Michael's life. When Michael Jackson trusted someone, he trusted deeply. And when he loved someone, he loved fully. So when Jerry invited him to his wedding, it wasn't a celebrity invitation. It was a personal one. And Michael Jackson honored it not with a gift, but with his presence. That presence, however, came at a cost. Every appearance Michael made risked media frenzy, public scrutiny, and renewed speculation. He knew this. He lived this. But he came anyway. Because sometimes love is worth the risk. Sometimes friendship is worth the headlines. Sometimes humanity is worth stepping into the light, even when the light has burned you before. But the story doesn't end when the wedding ends. Because what happened that day in Cape Town would ripple outward in ways no one expected. Word began to spread quietly at first, among insiders, diplomats, and select circles. Did you hear Michael Jackson attended that wedding? He was there. He danced. He cried. He stayed. And slowly the story emerged, not as a scandal, not as gossip, but as a legend. A legend of a man who, at the height of fame, chose humility. A legend of a man who, despite pain, chose love. A legend of a man who, in a world that often misunderstood him, showed the world his heart. But to truly understand the significance of this moment, we must understand Michael Jackson himself. Michael's life was one of extremes. Extreme talent, extreme fame, extreme scrutiny, extreme isolation. He became a star before he became a man. He became an icon before he had the chance to grow. From the moment he stepped onto a stage as a child, the world saw him not as a boy, but as a miracle. But miracles too get tired. Miracles too feel pain. Miracles too long for connection. And that longing, that deep human desire to belong, never left Michael Jackson. No matter how high he climbed, no matter how many records he broke, no matter how many awards he won, there was always a part of him searching for something more. Not more fame, not more money, not more applause, but more love, more understanding, more peace. Africa gave him a taste of that. Not because he was famous there, but because he felt rooted there. He felt connected. He felt seen. He felt, perhaps for the first time in a long time, at home. So when he attended that wedding, it wasn't just a social appearance. It was a spiritual moment, a reconnection with humanity, A reminder that beyond the noise, beyond the fame, beyond the pain, love still existed. And he still believed in it. But even as he smiled, even as he danced, even as he laughed, Michael Jackson carried something heavy inside him. A weight the world couldn't see. A burden he rarely shared. The burden of being misunderstood. The burden of being judged. The burden of being alone in a crowd of millions. And yet in that moment, inside that room, the burden lifted. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough. Enough for him to breathe. Enough for him to smile genuinely. Enough for him to feel human again. One guest later described it as the most peaceful I've ever seen him. Another said, it was like watching a man finally rest, even if only for a night. And perhaps that is what made the moment so powerful. Not that Michael Jackson attended a wedding, but that he found peace there. But peace, as we know, is fragile. And as the years passed, the world would not grow kinder to Michael Jackson. He would continue to face scrutiny. He would continue to face judgment. He would continue to face loneliness. But moments like this, moments of connection, moments of love, moments of humanity, became the anchors that kept him grounded. And this wedding became one of those anchors. Years later, when people look back at his life, they often focus on the controversies, the trials, the headlines, the scandals. But what they often miss are the quiet moments, the human moments, the moments when Michael Jackson wasn't performing, but living, the moments when he wasn't singing, but feeling, the moments when he wasn't entertaining, but connecting. And this wedding was one of those moments. It was not a public spectacle. It was not a career milestone. It was not a headline event. But it was a deeply human moment, and sometimes those moments matter more than anything else. Because history isn't only written in stadiums and headlines. Sometimes history is written in quiet rooms, in whispered vows, in tearful smiles, in gentle dances, in silent understanding. And on that day in Cape Town, Michael Jackson wrote a chapter of history, not with a microphone, not with a stage, not with a spotlight, but with his presence. But the story doesn't end there. Because long after the music stopped, long after the guests went home, long after the candles burned out, the memory remained. Not just for those who were there, but for Michael Jackson himself. In later years, those close to him would say that he often spoke fondly of moments like these, moments when he felt safe, moments when he felt loved, moments when he felt human, moments when the world wasn't watching, moments when he wasn't performing, moments when he could simply be. And in a life defined by spectacle, those moments became sacred. But there is another layer to this story, one that goes beyond the wedding, beyond Africa, beyond fame. It is the story of resilience. Because despite everything Michael Jackson faced, despite the pain, the judgment, the loneliness, he never stopped believing in love. He never stopped believing in kindness. He never stopped believing in humanity. And that belief is what led him to moments like this. Moments where he could witness love. Moments where he could feel hope. Moments where he could, even briefly, escape the storm. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of this story. That even in the darkest times, even when the world feels cruel, even when hope feels distant, love still exists. Connection still exists. Humanity still exists. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one wedding, one room, one dance to remind us of that. But the world, as we know, did not always extend that same kindness to Michael Jackson. He continued to face challenges. He continued to face criticism. He continued to face isolation. But he also continued to give. He continued to create. He continued to inspire. He continued to believe. And that belief would echo through his music, his philanthropy, and his legacy long after his life ended. Today, when people speak of Michael Jackson, They often speak of his records, his dances, his performances. They speak of Thriller. They speak of the moonwalk. They speak of stadiums filled with screaming fans. But they rarely speak of moments like this, moments of quiet humanity, moments of love, moments of connection, moments when he wasn't the king of pop, but simply Michael. And yet, it is these moments that reveal his true character. Not the fame, not the fortune, not the controversy, but the heart that cried at weddings, the heart that danced with strangers, the heart that believed in love, even when the world made that belief difficult, the heart that sought peace, even when peace felt impossible. And that heart on that day in Cape Town found a moment of rest. But the story becomes even more powerful when we consider the symbolism of the setting. A wedding, a union of two souls, witnessed by a man whose life had been shaped by the world's expectations. A private ceremony, protected from the public eye, attended by the most public figure on earth. A diplomatic residence, a place of politics and power, transformed into a sanctuary of love and humanity. It was a contradiction, a paradox, a miracle, and perhaps that is what made it so unforgettable. Because it reminded everyone there, and everyone who would later hear the story, that even legends need love. Even icons need connection. Even kings need a place to rest. And that place for Michael Jackson was found not on a stage, but in a wedding hall in South Africa. But the story doesn't stop with emotion. It also carries inspiration. Because Michael Jackson didn't just attend that wedding as a guest. He attended it as a symbol of unity, a symbol of compassion, a symbol of humanity. His presence reminded everyone there, and everyone who would later hear the story, that love transcends borders, that friendship transcends fame, that humanity transcends headlines, and that even in a world divided by politics, race, class, and power, love still brings people together. And that perhaps was his greatest gift. Not the music, not the fame, not the fortune, but the ability to remind the world again and again that love matters. And that is why this story still resonates today. Not because it is shocking, not because it is scandalous, not because it is sensational, but because it is human. Because it shows us a side of Michael Jackson that we rarely see, the side that longs, that feels, that connects, that believes. And in a world that often forgets the humanity behind fame, this story reminds us that behind every legend is a person who loves, a person who hurts, a person who hopes, a person who needs. And Michael Jackson, perhaps more than anyone, needed moments like this. Moments of peace, moments of connection, moments of love. And on October 8, 1997, in a quiet residence in Cape Town, he found one. But what makes this story even more powerful is what it tells us about us. About how we see celebrities. About how we treat icons. About how we forget that behind every headline is a human being. We consume their music. We watch their performances. We analyze their lives. We judge their choices. We debate their actions. But we rarely ask how they feel. We rarely ask what they need. We rarely ask how they survive the weight of the world's expectations. And stories like this remind us that even the greatest among us are still human, still vulnerable, still searching, still longing, still hopping. And perhaps in telling this story, we are reminded to be kinder, not just to celebrities but to everyone. To remember that behind every face is a story. Behind every smile is a struggle. Behind every success is a sacrifice. Behind every legend is a human heart. And that heart deserves compassion. But the story of Michael Jackson at this wedding is not just a story about him. It is a story about love. It is a story about connection. It is a story about humanity. And it is a story about hope. Hope that even in the darkest times, light still exists. Hope that even in the loudest noise, silence still matters. Hope that even in the most public lives, Private moments still hold power. Hope that even in a world full of division, love still unites. And perhaps that is why this story endures. Not because it is extraordinary, though it is, but because it is deeply human. And in that humanity, we find ourselves. We find our longing. We find our pain. We find our hope. We find our love. And in finding that, we are reminded of what truly matters. Not fame, not fortune, not power, not recognition, but love, connection, humanity, peace. And Michael Jackson, in his quiet attendance at a wedding in South Africa, gave us a glimpse of that truth. He stopped the world, not with a song, not with a dance, not with a performance, but with his presence. And in doing so, he reminded us that sometimes, the most powerful moments in life are not the loudest. They are the quietest. Not the brightest, but the warmest. Not the most public, but the most personal. And that is where true magic lies. So as we reflect on this moment, this wedding, this appearance, this story, let us remember Michael Jackson not only as the king of pop, but as a human being. A human being who loved. A human being who hurt. A human being who hoped. A human being who believed. A human being who, in a quiet room in Cape Town, found a moment of peace. And perhaps in remembering that, we find a little peace too. And yet, even after that night faded into memory, the quiet power of that moment continued to echo, not just in the lives of those who were there, but in the deeper currents of Michael Jackson's life itself. Because moments like these were not isolated. They were fragments of a larger hidden story, a story of a man who, despite unimaginable fame, was constantly searching for a place where he could simply belong. In the years following that wedding, those close to Michael Jackson would recall how often he spoke of Africa, not in grand speeches, not in public declarations, but in quiet conversations, late-night reflections, and personal letters. Africa for him was not just geography. It was memory. It was ancestry. It was identity. It was, in many ways, the emotional opposite of the world he inhabited every day, a world of contracts, cameras, expectations, and endless demands. What he found in Africa and what he briefly touched at that wedding in Cape Town was something rarer than fame: stillness. Stillness from the noise of tabloids. Stillness from the pressure of perfection. Stillness from the burden of being watched. And in that stillness, Michael Jackson found a version of himself that the world rarely allowed him to be: vulnerable, reflective, and quietly joyful. But the world outside that room did not stop. The world continued to spin. The headlines continued to write themselves. The rumors continued to spread. The expectations continued to rise. And Michael Jackson, once again, had to step back into the spotlight. Yet something had changed. Those who worked with him after that trip noticed a subtle shift, not dramatic, not public, but real. He carried himself with a gentler energy. He spoke more often about peace. He leaned more deeply into his humanitarian vision. He spoke less about fame and more about healing. Because when someone witnesses pure love, not staged, not transactional, not performative, it leaves a mark. And that wedding had left a mark on Michael Jackson. He had seen love without cameras. He had seen commitment without applause. He had seen joy without expectation. And it reminded him of the kind of world he had always tried to create through his music. A world where love comes first, where unity transcends difference, where humanity outweighs ego. It is no coincidence that so much of Michael Jackson's later work leaned heavily into themes of healing, restoration, and global compassion. Songs like Heal the World, Earth Song, and We Are the World were not just artistic expressions. They were emotional truths. They were the language of a man who believed, even when it hurt, that the world could be better. And moments like that wedding were proof, not that the world was perfect, but that it was capable of beauty. But there is another layer to this story, one that is rarely discussed, but deeply important. Because behind every public appearance of Michael Jackson was a private struggle, a struggle not just with fame, but with trust. Trusting the world. Trusting the media. Trusting people. Trusting himself. For years, he had been betrayed, misrepresented, and misunderstood. His life had become a battlefield between who he was and who the world said he was. And in that battle, trust became one of the rarest and most fragile things he possessed. So when Michael Jackson stepped into that wedding, he wasn't just attending a ceremony. He was stepping into a space of trust, a space where he felt safe, a space where he felt protected, a space where he could lower his guard. And that for him was priceless. Those who were there later said that his demeanor was different, softer, more relaxed, more present. He wasn't scanning the room. He wasn't tense. He wasn't guarded. He was simply there. And that presence, that openness, was something few people ever saw. It was the presence of a man who, for once, did not feel hunted by the world. It was the presence of a man who, for once, did not feel like he had to defend his existence. It was the presence of a man who, for once, felt free. And freedom for Michael Jackson was not found in fame. It was found in moments like this. Moments where love had no agenda. Moments where connection had no cost. Moments where humanity had no performance. And perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate, because it reveals something we all long for. Not fame, not fortune, not recognition, but safety, belonging, peace. And in telling this story, we are not just remembering a celebrity moment, we are remembering a human truth. That even the most famous person in the world is still searching for the same things we are. Connection, understanding, love. But the story also challenges us, not just to admire Michael Jackson, but to reflect on how we treat those who live in the public eye. Because fame, as we know, is not protection. It is exposure. It does not shield. It amplifies. It does not comfort. It isolates. And behind the glamour, there is often loneliness. Behind the applause, there is often silence. Behind the spotlight, there is often darkness. And Michael Jackson, perhaps more than anyone, lived inside that paradox. Loved by millions. Understood by few. Surrounded by crowds. Yet deeply alone. And moments like that wedding were rare, not because of who was there, but because of how he felt. He felt seen. He felt safe. He felt human. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all. But as the years passed, the world would grow louder, harsher, and more unforgiving. And Michael Jackson would once again find himself navigating storms he never asked for. He would continue to face scrutiny. He would continue to face judgment. He would continue to face isolation. But even in the darkest moments, he never stopped believing in love. He never stopped believing in kindness. He never stopped believing in humanity. And that belief, though fragile, remained his compass. It guided his music. It guided his philanthropy. It guided his relationships. It guided his choices. And it guided him, quietly, to moments like this. Moments where love spoke louder than headlines. Moments where humanity outweighed controversy. Moments where peace replaced noise. And perhaps, in remembering this story, we are reminded that the most important moments in life are often the quiet ones. Not the award ceremonies. Not the record-breaking performances. Not the red carpets. But the moments when someone feels seen. When someone feels safe. When someone feels loved. Because those moments, though invisible to the world, are the ones that truly change us. And Michael Jackson, in that quiet wedding hall in Cape Town, experienced one of those moments. A moment of stillness. A moment of connection. A moment of peace. And in that moment, the world did not matter. Only love did. Only humanity did. Only presence did. And perhaps, in telling this story, we are not just honoring Michael Jackson. We are honoring the power of love. We are honoring the importance of kindness. We are honoring the beauty of connection. We are honoring the humanity that exists within all of us, even those the world places on pedestals. Because behind every legend is a human story. And behind every human story is a heart, fragile, hopeful, searching. And Michael Jackson's heart on that day found a place to rest. So as we continue to tell these stories, stories of fame, stories of humanity, stories of connection, let us remember what truly matters. Not the headlines, not the scandals, not the controversies, but the moments when love wins, the moments when humanity shines, the moments when someone feels seen, the moments when someone feels safe, the moments when someone feels loved. If this continuation deepened your understanding of Michael Jackson and the quiet moments that shaped his life, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who believes in the power of humanity. Your support helps keep these untold stories alive.